Hello and welcome to Undercover. I'm your host, Kevin Bousquet. I'm a licensed private investigator. My guest today is Paul Ancorn, and like myself, Paul Ancorn is a private investigator. He's been licensed for 30 years in the business, working in the business solid. However, his specialty is surveillance, doing surveillance for corporations and insurance companies, that kind of thing. Now, just to give you a bit of a background, Paul is Canada's only certified surveillance expert. He's the author of 3 books on surveillance. You can use him finding him teaching at various colleges throughout Ontario on the areas of surveillance. Now, just to give you a bit of background on my guest and my friend Paul, I have known Paul for 20 years. When I graduated from college in the early 80s, the first Bay Street private investigation firm that I worked for a number of years, Paul Ancorn worked there with me, and virtually most of the interesting cases that I ever did were in the 80s and were done with Paul Ancorn with some of the surveillance techniques that he used to get results for corporate and insurance clients. Now, I'm going to tell just a couple of war stories here of some of the things that I've done with him. I'm writing this book, and it's called Inside the Eye, and 4 of the chapters in my book have to deal with Paul because of the cases that were so interesting that I was involved in. Now, some of the things that I've done with him, for example, I recall many, many years ago, I was involved in a case where I was wearing camouflage army clothes, and I had my face painted with camouflage paint, and we were in a forest, and we were taking video of a shipping and receiving area where air conditioners were being manufactured and stolen by employees. And we were taking video of that. We were running license plates. We were determining who the particular thieves were that were stealing from the company. I recall another case where we were doing surveillance in a graveyard, in a Catholic graveyard, to determine who was damaging the graveyard. This particular graveyard, there was graffiti, gravestones were being kicked over, and we were set up in an office trying to look at a graveyard that was miles and miles and miles of graveyard area, but the problem is there was a limitation. We couldn't see things behind us, and Paul came in with a device, this military device called a seismic intrusion alarm, which was like a stake that you could plug in the ground, and if anybody walked, the vibrations of the earth would cause an alarm and cause us to look over and try and find the area where the seismic intrusion alarm went off. The problem was we're getting lots of false alarms. Maybe it was because of graveyard, I don't know. But that's one thing I remember. Another thing I remember is doing literally hundreds and hundreds of disability insurance investigations, going out in surveillance and following people in the morning who were faking their injuries, going to work unannounced to their employees, that kind of stuff. And within the past probably 12 years, I have independently hired Paul to do a lot of patent trademark work for me, where we have done things like fraudulent watches that were being sold on the street, identifying who the vendors were, following them back to where they were being stored, trying to find out who was manufacturing the watches or where they were being distributed for. So there are a lot of important uses for surveillance in this business, in this industry. So Paul, I'm sorry to ramble. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kevin.
Can you give us an idea? One of the stigmas that people always think about PIs is, oh, you're one of those guys who follows housewives. Do you have an office above a store? Who is it that's hiring you primarily?
Unlike 25, 30 years ago, Kevin, there's very little following of cheating husbands and wives these days.
Why is that?
Simply because the divorce laws have changed. It's not a requirement that you prove adultery. The largest consumers for investigators doing surveillance are private insurance companies, the workers' compensation, WSIB, and private corporations for things, everything from employees who are off on sick leave when they're not really sick, or or collecting insurance benefits under the group plan, to employees who are suspected of stealing, pilfering, cheating on their time, using drugs and alcohol in a workplace that's heavily industrialized, thus posing a health and safety hazard to other workers and indeed the company itself, its physical assets. And then, as you mentioned earlier, patent and trademark infringements. There is quite a bit of surveillance involved in that on occasion, as well as things like dumpster dives and background checking and so on.
Okay, now with respect to insurance, we'll break it down into some of the stuff. Can you give us an idea? All right, I own a company and I'm paying X amount of benefits for some worker out there. I know he's working because I'm calling him, he's not coming into work, that kind of stuff. What is involved in a surveillance on a person who we think is faking an injury? I'm the employer, I'm paying the benefit to the insurance company. Tell me a brief idea what's involved in following someone.
Well, setting up surveillance on an individual, surveillance of any type is very man-hour intensive. That's the first thing, and that's the thing that scares a lot of companies from actually engaging in it. However, sometimes it's your best way to get the evidence that you need to prove that it's a fraudulent claim.
So I take it then your business isn't 9 to 5.
It's not 9 to 5 by any long shot. Most days I'm up at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm often still up at midnight doing paperwork.
Wow.
And or surveillance.
Okay.
It's a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week, 365-day-a-year business endeavor, which is why a lot of people really don't like getting into it.
Right. Now, on the average, would you say, with respect to insurance companies, is there any kind of a percentage you could think with respect to the standard disability, with respect to WSIB, how much of is there a percentage is how much claims are actually fraudulent out there?
Percentage-wise, it's a very difficult thing to put down in statistics, simply because a lot of the times these fraudulent claims are not prosecuted by private insurance companies. Okay. WSIB will prosecute, so that's a little bit different.
So why aren't the insurance companies prosecuting?
There's no profit in the prosecution.
I see.
It doesn't mean that it's not a fraudulent claim. More times than not, what they will do is use the evidence collected to simply terminate the benefits.
So you're saying if they're committing an illegal act of faking injury, there's a likelihood that they're probably not going to get charged by police at all?
A very high probability.
Wow. Okay. And if you're working for the WSIB program, you're saying?
That's a different story. WSIB has a zero tolerance policy, and they will bring charges.
Okay.
Now, more times than not, WSIB will try to go after employers if they are the one initiating the investigation. However, if private companies are initiating the investigation, which they have a right to do, then it's the fraudulent worker, and a very high percentage of claims are fraudulent.
Wow. Okay. Let's move on to a corporate aspect. Let's give you a scenario. I own a company. Let's say I'm manufacturing a particular product. I've got losses. I know those losses are coming out the back door, and I'm thinking that I don't know anything about anything. I'm thinking, well, hey, maybe I should hire a surveillance guy to go out and do it. Can you give us an example of what be involved, without giving away any secrets, of course, but just a rough idea what the employer should be thinking about as far as surveillance on an external, internal theft situation where stuff's going out the back door kind of thing?
Well, first step should be the investigator going and meeting with the client and getting a first-hand, hands-on view of the location. Logistics is very important. Sometimes external surveillance isn't always the best first option. It might be more practical and beneficial for us to conceal a hidden camera inside the location at the door. A hidden camera hidden in an exit sign that's over the pedestrian doors inside of every factory and office, or in a fire extinguisher, or some common item that they're not going to think of looking for a camera there. That way you will get a first-hand view of the person coming out the door with the product, because from outside you may not be able to see that clearly.
Right. Okay.
Just for logistics purposes. Oftentimes it's a good practice to engage in both. Have the hidden camera inside as well as a man outside to actually see what happens to that product after it comes out that door. Does it go into the trunk of a car? Is it stashed and picked up later, which oftentimes is the way it happens. I think you'll remember a case where we did, easily 25 years ago, where the employees were taking the product out the door, putting it in the long grass beside the fence which surrounded the employee parking area, and then they would come back after business hours. The managers, the supervisors have all left. They'd come back, pull up their vehicles, open the trunks, and put the stuff in the
and that, that's one of the chapters that you're in my book, and that was a situation where I actually worked undercover in a sporting goods facility in a warehouse, and the stuff was going out back. It was being hidden, and there's actually a chapter in my book where I actually talk about how you were out there watching that area, waiting for them to come back after hours to pick up the product. Now, one of the things I just remembered, I might just tell another story, I hope you don't mind, is I remember a situation where it was a clothing distributor, clothing that you could find in a mall, for example, but it was a warehouse. And I remember what they were doing is they were putting the clothes in a bag,